Cyber Essentials Questionnaire Certification Guide. Thank you for choosing Digital X-Ray to guide you through the Cyber Essentials certification process. This guide will explain the questions and hopefully enable you to provide valid responses for all the questions. If you have any further questions in addition to this guide, please do email us at cyberessentials@digitalxray.com. Right, let's get to the document. First of all, you'll see a brief introduction and a box to fill in your organization details. This is simply your limited company, company number, the sector you're in, the number of employees, and then your document completion date. Following this, there is the company registered address, and then the contact details of the main contact. This is the person who's going to be filling out the form, and if we need to get back to you about anything, this is the contact that we'll use. Section 1.2 asks for the scope of the Cyber Essentials certification. This is an easy one. You put your registered company name, UK operations. You can de-scope the Cyber Essentials, however, please get in touch and talk this through to see if it's applicable to your organization. The next section is Section 2. Now, what this is trying to gather is information about the external infrastructure that you may have. These are internet-facing, accessible from the internet, devices for us to perform an external vulnerability scan against. The vulnerability scan is an automated scan of any external assets and will assess for any well-known vulnerabilities within those devices. These are specifically systems accessible from the internet, not to the internet, I might stress, from the internet, that you wholly manage. For example, this could be an email server that's hosted and managed by yourselves in your place of business that you have total management of. Alternatively, if you have a website that's hosted by a shared hosting provider, this would be deemed out of scope, as the infrastructure is not managed by yourselves and you're simply uploading content. So, just to reiterate, if you're hosting an email service or something from within your organization or your building where you have whole control over the operating system that is accessible from the internet with a public internet-facing IP address, this would be in the scope of the assessment. Generally, in most cases, this section will only contain the broadband or internet service provider public IP. This is the IP address issued to you from your ISP that allows all your internal devices to connect outbound to the internet. You can obtain your external IP address by visiting google.co.uk and simply type "What's my IP?". This has to be performed from one of your workstations within your business location. We then move on to the cloud shared services. This is mainly an informational section. It's mainly to promote that you should be checking all of the cloud shared services that you engage and ensuring that they adhere to security standards, such as Cyber Essentials itself or ISO 27001. Things like Office 365 have quite a comprehensive compliance section on their website, which shows all of the certification that they hold. This is just for you to enter those details and ensure that you're not using any spurious or unknown cloud services. The next section allows you to schedule the vulnerability scan. Some customers do like us to do this out of hours, just in case of any interruption in service, which is very rare. In fact, this has never happened, but it's sometimes people's preference. If you pick a date and time here, then we can get the scan scheduled in. Now we come to the questionnaire part of the Cyber Essentials assessment, and this is the part that people may struggle with if they're not familiar with IT infrastructure. The first section covers boundary firewalls and internet gateways. So, question 1. Have one or more firewalls or similar network device been installed on the boundary of your organization's internal networks? What this question is asking is, have you got a security device, firewall, between you and the internet? In many cases, this will be the ISP broadband router. Question 2. Has the default administrative password of the firewall, or equivalent network device, been changed to an alternative difficult-to-guess password? This question simply means, have you ensured the administrator password on your firewall, or in some cases broadband router, has been changed from the manufacturer's default password? This could be the password which was given in the box when the device was shipped out to you. Question 3. Has each open connection, i.e. allowed ports and services on the firewall, been subject to approval by an authorized business representative and documented, including an explanation of business need? This means, do you ensure firewall changes and potential rule changes are authorized by an IT manager or a director? Do you keep a record of the rules and why they're in place? This can be something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. Example: Workstations are permitted to access external websites via port 80 and 443. Question 4. Have vulnerable services, e.g. server message block, SMB, NetBIOS, Telnet, TFTP, RPC, RLogin, RSH or RExec, been disabled, blocked, by default? And those that are allowed have a business justification? This question is asking if the above services are blocked by default. NetBIOS, Telnet and those listed in the question are deemed as insecure protocols. They should only be used as an exception with clear justification why they need to be available. Question 5. Have firewall rules that are no longer required been removed or disabled? This means if you add an additional rule or additional access through the firewall, do you ensure it's removed or disabled when no longer required? Question 6. Are firewall rules subject to regular review? This means what it says. Do you ensure firewall rules are reviewed at regular intervals, such as 6 monthly, annually, etc.? Question 7. Have computers that do not need to connect to the Internet been prevented from initiating connections to the Internet? Default deny. If you do not have any machines that do not need access to the Internet, please answer yes. As although you have none, if you do add additional devices that do not require Internet access, then ensure these are blocked. Question 8. Has the administrative interface used to manage the boundary firewall been configured such that it's not accessible from the Internet? If no, then A. Does the administrative interface require second-factor authentication, or is it limited to a specific address? This question wants to know how your system administrator accesses the firewall. Good practice would be to only allow administration from within your network, limit admin access by IP address if possible, particular people within the org at the machine level, and implement two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is what you'll use if you access your bank, etc., where you'll enter credentials and a password and then receive a text or code via an app. So the next section you need to look at is section 3.2, Secure Configuration. If we look at question 9, it asks if any unnecessary user accounts on the internal workstations or equivalent Active Directory domains, e.g. guests, previous employees, etc., are removed or disabled. Now, what this means is simply that when a user leaves the organization, do you ensure that that employee's user account is disabled or deleted from your system? This is good housekeeping. In the case of where you're using shared logins, which ideally is not something you should do, you should ensure that you change the password upon someone leaving the organization. Question 10. Have default passwords for any user accounts been changed to a difficult-to-guess password? The idea of this is that users are forced to change their password on first login, and to ensure that there is a significantly complex password used, not something like password 123, something that contains uppercase, lowercase, symbols and numbers, and over 8 characters in length. To further solidify this, question 11 asks, have you got a policy in place that's enforced technically to ensure complex passwords are used? This is where, on workstations or via centralized authentication servers, you can set a complex password in that you have to use capital letters, numbers and symbols within that password, and it has to be of a certain length. This is settable on a per workstation basis. The next question, question 12, asks if the Autorun feature has been disabled. This is a historic setting whereby if you ever used a CD-ROM a few years ago, then you would put a CD-ROM in and it would autoplay music or it would start a piece of software and ask you to install it. The same applies here for Autorun, more around flash drives and removable media. Again, it's quite an easy registry fix to get this disabled. So this is to ensure that the Autorun feature is disabled within the Windows environment or on the machine that you're using. We can supply guides on how to do this if required. Question 13. Has unnecessary, frequently vendor-bundled, software been removed or disabled? When you get a new laptop and power it up for the first time and it's pre-installed with Windows 10 or whichever version of Windows is on there, have you made sure that any unnecessary software or vendor-bundled software has been removed? This could be things like games, pre-installed Office products or other software. It's just making sure that you get those off there if they're not required for everyday business. Question 14. Is all additional software added to workstations approved by IT or management staff prior to installation, and are standard users prevented from installing software? This means if additional software is purchased, is it approved by a manager, and also are users restricted from installing software themselves? Question 15. Has a personal firewall been enabled on desktop PCs and laptops? And has it been configured to disable, block, unapproved connections by default? Windows does have a default firewall installed, and this should always be enabled. Sometimes AV packages will overwrite the personal firewall or Windows inbuilt firewall and install their own software. This question is asking whether you have that installed. Have you got some sort of host-based firewall on the workstation, and is it enabled? Question 16. Are all workstations built from a fully hardened base platform to ensure security and consistency across the estate? This question is asking whether you use some sort of build standard to say this is the patch levels, this is the software that we install on every machine, and it's fully up to date at the time of rolling out. Also, things like Autorun and complexity of passwords that we've asked about previously, are they all factored into the build of the machine? So no machine goes out without these features installed. Question 17. Are Active Directory, or equivalent directory services tools, controls used to centralize the management and deployment of hardening and lockdown policies? Active Directory is a Windows-based server whereby you can manage a number of workstations, rather than go round individual workstations and enforce password policies, or even software updates. You can push this and control it out by Active Directory. Some of you will not have this. It all depends on the number of workstations and the size of the organization in question. It's not mandatory to have this, but it is best practice to use it if you can, because it allows an easier management of your systems. Question 18. Are proxy servers used to provide controlled access to the internet for relevant machines and users? This question is asking if you're using any URL filtering devices or software. A proxy server is usually an intermediary device that sits between you and your internet connection. It could be that your firewall has some sort of proxy capabilities, and it will filter out bad URLs or collect logs of usage or on what people are doing on the internet. Question 19. Is an offline backup of file journaling policy and solution in place to provide protection against malware that encrypts user data files? This is asking you if your data is backed up somewhere other than your office network. The reason behind this is if you were to fall foul of a crypto locker software or ransomware, for instance, then that would encrypt the local files on the machine and any connected shares. We're asking whether you have some sort of mechanism. Question 20. Is there a corporate policy on log retention and the centralized storage and management of log information? Generally, a lot of people don't have this. We can provide a template for this to show you the sorts of things that need to be in there if required. Basically, we're asking, have you written down how long you're keeping logs for? For instance, workstation logs or internet access logs. It could be something like user access, security logs, or workstation log information. So they all log who logged in, what's happened on the machine, and when something was installed by default. So this question is about how you're using these logs, and whether you're storing them somewhere centrally, so that in the event of an incident or something happening, you can go back to those logs, and you'll be able to hopefully track down where the issue arose or what was the root cause. Question 21 is covering log files again. It's asking about log files retained on operating systems, servers, and workstations. So these logs are kept automatically. Workstations log events. It's just asking whether you're aware that that's happening and how to access the logs. And again, that should be covered in the policy. Question 22 is again log related to files. In this case, it's asking if you're keeping log files from servers for a period of at least 3 months. Again, this is so that if anything was to happen, like an incident or breach, you can go back through those logs and hopefully retrace the steps of where the issue arose, or even collate evidence that could be used in a criminal case. Question 23. Are internet access logs retained for a period of at least 3 months? Question 24. Are mobile devices and tablets managed centrally to provide remote wiping and locking in the event of loss or theft? This question is quite self-explanatory. If, for instance, one of the smartphones, tablets, or one of the devices that you used within the business was lost, do you have the capability to remote wipe it or control it? Do you also have the capability to ensure that there are certain policies on there? Some antivirus products will come with this feature. Question 24 is asking whether you have something in place to do that. Question 25. Is a mobile device management solution in place for hardening and controlling all mobile platforms in use within the organization? This question is an extension of question 24. This is asking whether you have something whereby with the mobile devices within your organization, so again, phones, tablets, or even laptops, you're able to control what is done with those. And are they hardened, so you control apps that are being installed? And can you remotely wipe them if required? Question 26. Remote, internet, access to commercially or personal sensitive data and critical information requires authentication. This should be an easy one. All of your workstations should have authentication on, so there should be some sort of user account, and also if you're accessing any sort of data storage or cloud storage platforms, you need to ensure that if there is any critical, personal or sensitive data, then you need to ensure that there is authentication, so it's not just publicly available. Now we move on to access control. Question 27. Is user account creation subject to a full provisioning and approval process? This is asking if, when you create a new user in your organization, does it go through some sort of approval? Are the right people made aware? Is there a process for enabling a user? This is trying to say that you need to capture, somewhere centrally, who has got access to the machines. So it's the start of getting a system in place and a process for, 1, enabling a new user, and 2, going through some sort of approval process, again to ensure that they have the correct rights and access privileges to the data that they should have. Question 28. Are system administrative access privileges restricted to a limited number of authorized individuals? This is asking if the users that have admin rights or administrative access to the systems really need those rights to do their job. And are they restricted to only people that need the administrative privileges? This is because it's very dangerous to allow everybody to have administrative rights within the organization. Because, for instance, if they were a domain admin or an admin on every workstation, or even their individual workstation, if they download some malware or something malicious, then they can execute that straight away without it being stopped, and that can further infect other machines, or completely destroy the machine that you're on by encrypting it or whatever the payload might be. So it's saying, are you restricting administrative privileges to only those that need them? A follow-on from that is question 29. Are user accounts assigned to specific individuals, and are staff trained not to disclose their password to anyone? So this is saying that every user should have an individual account, and it should be specific to what that user is going to do with it. It should be restricted. They shouldn't be an admin if they don't need to be. And also, are they taught about good password habits, and not to disclose their password? So what a user shouldn't do is ever give their credentials to anybody else. Question 30. Are all administrative accounts, including servers accounts, only used to perform legitimate administrative activities, with no access granted to external email or the internet? So again, what this is saying is regarding those administrative accounts. You should not be using an admin account for day-to-day running or day-to-day access to your systems. You should only use the administrative account when you are required to update or install new software or provide administrative assistance. When you're in those accounts, you shouldn't be accessing email or the internet. Administrative accounts should be completely separate. The reason being that most threats come via email, which could be malicious payloads, or via the internet via infected websites, etc., or downloading malicious files. Question 31. Are system administrative accounts, including service accounts, configured to lock out after a number of unsuccessful attempts? This is asking if I get the password wrong a number of times, does that account lock? You should always set this to one of the following failures. So, after 3 failures it locks out, or after 6 failures it locks out. 3 is the best, but it goes up to 10. You should always have this in place as it stops people from just randomly brute forcing the password. There are scripts out there that will just keep trying dictionary words or password iterations. And if you don't have it to lock out, it can just go on forever until it does find the right password combination. Question 32. Is there a password policy covering the following points? A. How to avoid choosing obvious passwords, such as those based on easily discoverable information. So this is about education again. So you're informing your user base that, let's say you work in a coffee shop, we're not going to make our password something coffee shop related. We're telling people to use a non-obvious password, especially around who we are, with our names or dates of birth, anything like that. It's got to be something completely unassociated with the individual and the circumstances that they're working in, or what they're doing. B. Not to choose common passwords. Use of technical means, using a password blacklist recommended. So what we're saying here is don't choose common passwords. There are password lists out there that will contain passwords such as password 123, secret 123, and things like that, so there are a lot of common passwords that shouldn't be used. But complexity should get rid of that, really. C. No password reuse. This is saying that if you've had a password for a certain amount of time, then you're forcing users to change it. Within 30 days, they can't reuse that password. They have to use something new. D. Where and how they may record passwords to store and retrieve them securely. This question is asking about password managers. Do you use any password management tools to store passwords to ensure that you have different passwords for different systems? And is that secure? Is it locked up? Is it only accessible to you? E. Is password management software allowed? If so, which? This is asking what sort of password software are you using. F. Which passwords they really must memorize and not record anywhere. This covers passwords that you must memorize. So, for instance, if you've got a password to get into your password management software, you wouldn't want to store that anywhere. You must know that one. It's not something you can easily write down or file anywhere because it's too sensitive. Question 33. Are users authenticated using difficult-to-guess passwords, as a minimum, before granted access to applications and computers? This question is about the login to your workstations or systems. Have they got complex passwords that are not easily guessed? Again, like we covered in the previous questions, things like password 123 or things related to the nature of the business or the individual. Ensure that they're unique passwords and difficult to guess. Question 34. Are user accounts removed or disabled when no longer required, e.g. when an individual changes role or leaves the organization, or after a predefined period of activity, e.g. 3 months? When a user leaves the business or takes an absence from the organization, does their account become disabled from inactivity? Perhaps you need to shut it down because they've left the business or indeed because they've moved roles within the business. So does that account still need to be there? And if it doesn't, is it removed? Question 35. Are data shares, shared drives, configured to provide access strictly linked to job function in order to maintain the security of information held within sensitive business functions, such as HR and finance? If you're using a shared storage service, is the information pertinent to that individual the only thing they can access? So you're not putting things on there like, in the example of HR and finance details, that for instance the receptionist can access. Things like employee records, salary details, etc. You're keeping those things away from the users that don't need to access them. We then come on to the malware section of the questionnaire. This section is ensuring you're using some sort of antivirus and malware product on all your devices. Which of the following does the organization mainly rely on for malware protection? A. Antivirus or malware protection. Continue to question 37 to 40. B. Application whitelisting. Continue to question 41 to 43. C. Application sandboxing. Continue to question 44. So this question is asking what controls you have in place to protect from malware. So, A. Do you use antivirus products on your devices? B. Do you use application whitelisting? This is how the App Store works on an iPhone. You can only install apps that are approved by Apple, no one else. C. Sandboxing is where you totally isolate unknown code and execute in an isolated infrastructure or virtual environment. Most of you will be using A here. Hence, you only need to answer questions 37 to 40. Question 37. Has antivirus or malware protection software been installed on all computers that are connected to or capable of connecting to the Internet? An easy one. Are you using an antivirus product on your device? Question 38. Has antivirus or malware protection software, including program or engine code and malware signature files, been kept up to date, either by configuring it to update automatically or through the use of a centrally managed service? Another easy one. Most products are set to auto-update. Are you keeping your AV systems up to date? Question 39. Has antivirus or malware protection software been configured to scan files automatically upon access, including when downloading and opening files, accessing files on removable storage media or a network folder, and scan web pages when accessed, via a web browser. These are usually default settings for AV products, but please check or consult your vendor to ensure the software automatically scans files and folders. Question 40. Has malware protection software been configured to perform regular, periodic scans, e.g. daily? Same as above. This is generally a default setting, but please check with your vendors. Question 41. Are all applications which execute on devices approved by the business and restricted by code signing or other protection mechanisms? This is only applicable if you also selected B. This is asking if you're using a software whitelisting solution, much like how the App Store works. This could be a mechanism for you to approve and only install software from your own application list. For most, this will not be applicable. Question 42. Does the organization maintain a list of approved applications? This follows on from the above. Do you have a list of all the approved applications used in your organization? Question 43. Are users prevented from installing any other applications? Easy one. Are standard users prevented from performing software installs? Everyone should be. Question 44. Is any unknown code limited to execute within a sandbox and cannot access any other resources unless the user grants explicit permission? So this is asking if you execute unknown code in an isolated environment, ensuring it is contained and cannot spread or infect other machines or devices should it be malicious. Now, this section is mainly about updating your machines to the latest patches that become available or security updates. The first question in this section. Question 45. Do you apply security patches to software running on computers and network devices? This means that when there's a Windows update or when there's a security patch for a certain version of software, say Adobe or Office, do you ensure that it's rolled out and applied to your machines? Again, this is to stop vulnerabilities. This is to stop malware transition and malicious payloads from infecting machines that are out of date, as these are the usual targets for hackers. Question 46. Has software running on computers that are connected to or capable of connecting to the Internet been licensed and supported by the software vendor or supplier of the software to ensure security patches for known vulnerabilities are made available? Is the software that you're running in your organization still supported by those vendors? And are they still releasing updates and security fixes if vulnerabilities do come available? Question 47. Has outdated or older software been removed from computer and network devices that are connected to or capable of connecting to the Internet? This question is asking if you've got an old version of software. So let's say you've got a very old Office version. Have you removed it from the machine? You haven't left it there and installed a newer version, and that you've got them running alongside each other. You're ensuring that you're taking out a mitigated risk from older software vulnerabilities by getting rid of that software off the machines. Question 48. Have all security patches for software running on computers and network devices that connect to or are capable of connecting to the Internet been installed within 14 days of release, or automatically when they become available from vendors? As soon as a security patch becomes available, the recommendation is that you install that within 14 days of release, or you have automatic updates set on your machines. Programs like Windows generally have automatic updates out of the box. Windows 10 does. So it's ensuring that it's set and you're doing an automatic update. And also that you're checking regularly on your other software that could be installed. So Adobe, or whatever it is that you're using, and ensuring that if any security fixes are released, you get them on there as soon as possible. This is trying to protect you from out-of-date software and potential vulnerabilities or security flaws that can be identified by the vendors, and ensuring that you roll them out very quickly to stop the risk of infection or malicious activity. Question 49. Are all smartphones kept up to date with vendor updates and application updates? This is an easy one. Generally, Apple and Android devices are all set to auto-update, or they prompt you to update the OS and applications as soon as they become available. So it's just ensuring that that's done in a timely fashion, and always when the updates are out. Question 50. Are all tablets kept up to date with vendor updates and application updates? Again, exactly the same as question 49. Generally, we're looking at iOS and Android-based tablets. Could be Windows as well, but you're ensuring that they're kept up to date and all the applications are up to date as and when vendor updates become available. Question 51. Do you perform regular vulnerability scans of your internal networks and workstations to identify possible problems and ensure that these are addressed? Now, this is one way you can use software-based tools to scan your internal network, your workstations and your servers to check for out-of-date software and any potential vulnerabilities. The sorts of software you could use here are Nessus, or a piece of software which is free called OpenVAS to scan your internal network and ensure that any vulnerabilities or potential security risks are identified quickly. Question 52. Do you perform regular vulnerability scans, annual or more frequent, of your external network to identify possible problems and ensure they're addressed? Same thing again, vulnerability scans, but this time it's asking if you're doing them on your external network to identify possible problems. As part of the Cyber Essentials, we'll be performing an external vulnerability scan, so it's asking you to do it annually or more frequently. In this case, if you were to retake the Cyber Essentials on an annual basis, then you would in fact be doing an annual vulnerability scan. And that takes us to the end of the questions. Now we're looking at the authorization page, so that we're not in breach of the Computer's Misuse Act. This is saying that we're going to scan the external assets identified in Scan Targets. Like I said, this is more than likely just going to be your broadband IP address, and where you're allowing us and authorizing us to scan that IP address for vulnerabilities. There's also a question there about whether you want to put your organization on the cyberessentials.org list. This links through to a government site which allows everyone who has attained Cyber Essentials certification, so it allows suppliers or potential partners or customers to go and check out your organization and see if you've got the certificate and standard. So you can either select the Cyber Essentials Basic, and the assessment ends here. You fill out the questionnaire, send that back, we do the vulnerability scan, and upon meeting the requirements, we issue certification. If you go for the Cyber Essentials Plus, we conduct the on-site audit, and we look at your workstation builds in detail. We'll do a pre-audit, tell you everything that you need to do to meet the standard, and then, if required, unless we get you through on the day, we'll come back and we'll do the final audit once you've implemented any changes that we've recommended to get you the Cyber Essentials Plus. The Cyber Essentials Plus does demonstrate that you're taking cybersecurity seriously, and you're meeting the minimum standards to do work with government organisations, and many larger suppliers are asking that all their supply chain meet these requirements as a minimum. There's also a box here to enter any additional information you may deem relevant. So if you're unsure of anything, or you can't fit any of your justification or answers in the boxes above, then please use that box. And that concludes the questionnaire. If you've got any questions, please do contact us direct at cyberessentials@digitalxray.com. Please feel free to ring or email anytime if you've got any queries or any questions around anything we've covered off in this presentation. That concludes the video, and I hope you found this valuable in helping you complete the questionnaire. Thank you very much.